The sentence. The great hall of the Eternal Council stretched endlessly into crystalline darkness, its walls pulsing with the cold blue light of ancient justice. High Arbiter Zefton stood at the center of the circular chamber, his 6 arms spread wide as he addressed the assembled representatives of 47 galactic civilizations. His voice echoed through translators in 100 different languages, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. Today we pass judgment on the species known as humanity, Zefton announced, his chitinous features twisted into what passed for a smile among the Vextar. They stand accused of the gravest crime imaginable, violation of the sacred preservation laws. Commander Elena Vasquez stood in the defendant's circle, her hands bound with energy shackles that hummed with barely contained power. Around her, the holographic displays showed the evidence of humanity's crime. Images of dying civilizations, their homeworlds ravaged by natural disasters, plague, or internal conflict. And there in each case were human ships, offering aid, sharing technology, attempting to save lives. The humans discovered the Kepler Union as their sun began to collapse, Zefton continued, his voice dripping with disgust. Rather than observe and document their natural extinction as the preservation laws require, they interfered. They offered evacuation ships, terraforming technology, even artificial suns to replace their dying star. The chamber erupted in gasps and clicking sounds from various species. To interfere with natural extinction was the ultimate taboo in galactic society. The universe was meant to follow its course, and civilizations were meant to rise and fall without outside interference. Dr. Marcus Chen, humanity's chief scientist, stepped forward despite his restraints. We couldn't just watch them die. They had children, families, dreams. They were asking for help. Silence. Zefton's voice boomed through the chamber. Your species' emotional weakness is exactly why you cannot be trusted with interstellar contact. You see suffering and you intervene, disrupting the natural order of selection and survival. Captain Sarah O'Brien, the military strategist from the New Horizons colony ship, spoke up from her position among the other human prisoners. We saved 6 billion lives across 12 worlds. How is that a crime? The High Arbiter turned his compound eyes toward her, their surface reflecting the chamber's blue light like mirrors. Because in your misguided compassion, you have upset the balance that has maintained galactic peace for 10,000 cycles. Weak civilizations are meant to fall. Strong ones are meant to survive. By interfering, you create dependencies, upset, establish territories, and threaten the stability of the entire galactic community. Representative Yulkar of the Merchant Coalition stepped forward, his crystalline form chiming as he moved. Surely exile is sufficient punishment, High Arbiter. These humans, while misguided, acted from their primitive emotional responses. Zefton's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. No, honored representative. Standard exile would only allow them to continue their interference from the outer rim. The Council has chosen a more fitting punishment. He gestured, and the chamber's central display showed a world that made several species representatives step back in horror. The planet appeared to be tearing itself apart. Gravity shifted visibly across its surface, creating floating mountains and inverse waterfalls. Storms of pure energy crackled through an atmosphere that shifted between transparent and opaque without warning. Time itself seemed to flow differently in various regions. Some areas showed rapid decay while others appeared frozen in temporal loops. Kithra Prime, Zefton announced with satisfaction. A world where reality itself is unstable, where the laws of physics change without warning, where time flows backward in some regions and stands still in others, where the very fabric of space-time is broken. Elena felt her stomach clench as she studied the chaotic world. It looked like a nightmare made manifest, a place where nothing could possibly survive for long. No species has ever managed to establish any form of permanent presence on Kithra Prime, the High Arbiter continued. The longest any expedition has survived is 17 standard days. The planet's reality distortions make it impossible to predict what will happen from one moment to the next. Dr. Chen's scientific mind raced as he observed the planet's impossible physics. The gravitational anomalies, the temporal distortions, what caused this? An ancient experiment, Zefton replied. A civilization that attempted to merge multiple dimensions into a single world. They succeeded briefly before the resulting instability destroyed them completely. Now their world exists as a monument to the dangers of interfering with natural law. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. This wasn't just exile. It was a death sentence disguised as punishment. The entire human population. Of your research colony ship, Zefton continued, all 100,000 individuals will be transported to Kythera Prime. You will be provided with basic survival supplies sufficient for 1 standard week. After that, you will be left to face the consequences of your actions. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. And if we somehow survive? What then? The High Arbiter's compound eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Then you will serve as an example to any other species that might consider interfering with the natural order. You will remain on Kythera Prime as a permanent reminder of what happens to those who violate the sacred preservation laws. Representative Kethra of the Peaceful Coalition, a being whose entire species was dedicated to diplomacy, spoke up hesitantly. High Arbiter, perhaps we should consider the precedent this sets. These humans acted out of compassion even if it was misguided. Compassion is weakness, Zefton replied coldly. Weakness that threatens the stability our civilization has maintained for millennia. The humans will learn this lesson, or they will die learning it. As the formal sentencing concluded, Elena looked around at her fellow humans. Scientists, engineers, doctors, teachers, children, all condemned to die on an impossible world because they had dared to save lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were being punished for the very thing that made them most human. The transport ships arrived within hours, their Vextar crews treating the humans like dangerous cargo. The journey to Kythera Prime took 3 standard days, during which the humans were kept in containment fields and fed minimal rations. Elena spent the time trying to prepare her people for what awaited them, though she wasn't sure how anyone could prepare for a world where reality itself was unstable. Dr. Chen used his restricted access to the ship's sensors to study Kythera Prime as they approached. The readings don't make sense, he reported to Elena quietly. Gravity that shifts by factors of 10 within meters, electromagnetic fields that pulse in impossible patterns, and temporal readings that suggest time is flowing in loops. Can we survive it? Elena asked. Chen was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. The physics are unlike anything I've ever studied. But humans have survived impossible things before. Captain O'Brien joined them, her expression grim. I've been thinking about the logistics. With reality distortions, this severe, conventional survival strategies won't work. We'll need to completely rethink how we approach shelter, food production, even basic movement. Then we adapt, Elena said simply. It's what humans do. The transport ship shuddered as it entered Kythera Prime's unstable atmosphere. Through the small viewports, they could see the planet's surface writhing with impossible forces. Mountains floated unsupported in midair, while valleys twisted into geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. Lightning struck upward from the ground, into storm clouds that moved in perfect circles. Beginning atmospheric descent, the Vextar captain announced without emotion. Prepare for surface deployment. The humans were herded into drop pods, basic survival capsules designed for emergency evacuation. Each pod contained a week's worth of food, water recycling equipment, and basic tools. It wasn't much to start a civilization with, but it was all they were being allowed. As Elena's pod sealed shut, she looked through the small window at the approaching surface of Kythera Prime. The ground seemed to ripple like water, and she could see areas where the landscape flickered between different states of existence. In some regions, time appeared to flow backward. She watched explosions collapse into their original state, then repeat the cycle endlessly. All pods away, came the announcement. Elena felt the stomach-dropping sensation of freefall as her pod separated from the transport ship. Around her, 99,999 other pods were falling toward the impossible world below. The pod's simple guidance systems couldn't cope with Kithra Prime's chaotic gravitational fields. Elena watched through her window as some pods suddenly changed direction mid-fall, caught in gravity wells that existed in three-dimensional space like invisible rivers. Other pods seemed to slow down or speed up as they passed through temporal anomalies. Her own pod struck an area where gravity was reversed. Instead of falling down, she found herself falling up, accelerating away from the planet's surface until she passed through what felt like an invisible barrier and suddenly dropped again. The pod's basic stabilizers screamed warnings as forces that shouldn't exist battered the small craft. Finally, after what felt like hours but could have been minutes or days in the distorted time stream, Elena's pod struck solid ground. The impact was surprisingly gentle. Either the gravity in this area was weaker than standard, or time was flowing slowly enough to cushion the landing. She activated the pod's external sensors and immediately regretted it. The readings were completely impossible. According to the instruments, gravity was pulling in 3 different directions simultaneously. The air pressure was fluctuating between vacuum and crushing density every few seconds, and the temperature was somehow both freezing and boiling at the same time. Elena took a deep breath and opened the pod's hatch. The air outside was breathable, though it tasted of ozone and something that reminded her of copper. The ground beneath her feet felt solid enough, though it seemed to shift colors as she watched. Around her, other pods were landing in flashes of light and impossible physics. Some materialized out of thin air, others phased through solid rock as if it didn't exist. A few pods seemed to be falling upward, their occupants probably experiencing the same gravitational reversal she had encountered. Dr. Chen's pod landed nearby, its hatch opening to reveal the scientist already taking readings with a handheld scanner. Elena, the readings are incredible. It's like the fundamental constants of physics are variables here. More humans emerged from their pods, looking around in wonder and terror at the landscape that seemed to shift and change with each passing moment. The sky above them was a swirling mass of colors that included shades that didn't exist in normal space, and the horizon curved in ways that made depth perception impossible. "Sound off," Elena called out, her voice carrying strangely in the distorted atmosphere. "Section leaders, report your status." One by one, the responses came back. Amazingly, all 100,000 humans had survived the landing. Whatever else Kithra Prime was, it hadn't killed them immediately. Captain O'Brien approached, her expression mixing awe and concern. "Elena, we need to establish some kind of base camp, but I'm not sure how. The ground here seems to be shifting between different states of matter." Elena nodded, looking around at the impossible landscape. In the distance, she could see mountains that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating a dizzying visual effect. Closer to their landing site, strange formations that looked like crystallized time jutted from the ground. "We start with what we know," she said finally. "We're human, we adapt, we survive. We find a way to turn this punishment into something else entirely." Dr. Chen looked up from his scanner, excitement and fear warring in his expression. "Elena, I'm detecting something else. Energy signatures that suggest this planet isn't uninhabited. There's something here, something that exists in the spaces between the reality distortions." As if summoned by his words, shapes began to form in the air around them. Not solid, not quite energy, but something that existed in the gaps between states of being. The humans watched in fascination as the forms coalesced into something almost recognizable, patterns of light and force that seemed to be observing them with curious intelligence. "First contact," Elena whispered. "Even here, on an impossible world, we're not alone." The punishment had begun, but Elena had the growing sense that the High Arbiter's cruel justice was about to become something he never intended. Humans had been sent to Kithra Prime to die, but they were already doing what humans did best, finding ways to turn impossible situations into opportunities. The real test was just beginning. The adaptation. The first month on Kithra Prime taught the humans that survival meant abandoning everything they thought they knew about physics, biology, and reality itself. The impossible world operated on rules that changed without warning, and conventional science was not just useless, it was dangerous. Engineer Jake Morrison discovered this the hard way when he tried to build a simple shelter using standard construction techniques. The framework he erected in the morning had turned into a twisted sculpture of bent metal by evening, apparently because the local gravity field had rotated 90 degrees while he wasn't looking. The tools he used experienced temporal displacement, aging decades in minutes before reverting to their original state. "Nothing stays the same here," he reported to Elena during their daily survival briefing. "I tried to construct a basic habitat dome, but the materials keep shifting between different states of matter. Steel becomes liquid, then gas, then something that doesn't exist in normal physics." Dr. Marcus Chen had been making similar discoveries in his attempts to understand their new environment. "The planet isn't just chaotic," he explained, his makeshift laboratory surrounded by instruments that gave readings that shouldn't be possible. "There's a pattern to the chaos, but it operates on principles we've never encountered. Time doesn't flow linearly here. It moves in spirals, loops, and sometimes sideways through dimensions we can't perceive." The human population had scattered across a roughly circular area, about 50 kilometers in diameter, the only region where the reality distortions were stable enough to allow basic survival. Beyond this zone, the distortions became so severe that matter itself became theoretical. Captain Sarah O'Brien had organized the humans into survival groups, each responsible for different aspects of their impossible existence. Food production was handled by teams that had learned to grow crops in soil that periodically became weightless. Water collection was managed by groups that had figured out how to capture moisture from humidity that sometimes existed in negative quantities. "We're not fighting this place," Elena realized during their second week. "We're learning to dance with it." This insight came when she witnessed something that changed her understanding of their situation entirely. A group of children too young to be constrained by adult preconceptions about physics had been playing in an area where gravity shifted in regular patterns. Instead of being thrown around by the changes, they had learned to predict them, moving with the gravitational tides as naturally as swimming. 8-year-old Maria Santos had become particularly adept at navigating the temporal anomalies. She could sense when time was about to loop back on itself and position herself to take advantage of the repetition. Elena watched in amazement as the child reached for a piece of fruit, failed to grab it, then positioned herself perfectly to catch it when time reset and the moment repeated. "How do you know when it's going to happen?" Elena asked the girl. Maria shrugged with the casual wisdom of childhood. "It feels funny right before, like when you know someone's watching you but different." Dr. Chen began studying the children's adaptations, and what he found challenged every assumption about human neurology. "Their brains are developing new neural pathways," he reported to Elena privately. "They're literally evolving cognitive abilities that allow them to perceive and predict the reality distortions." The adults began trying to learn what the children instinctively understood. Xenobiologist Dr. Lisa Park, who had spent her career studying how life adapted to extreme environments, took the lead in this effort. She developed exercises that helped adults develop the same intuitive sense of the planet's shifting physics. "It's not about understanding the distortions intellectually," she explained to a group of struggling engineers. "It's about feeling them. The planet isn't random, it's breathing, and we need to learn to breathe with it." Jake Morrison was the first adult to achieve the breakthrough. After weeks of frustration, he stopped trying to force conventional construction techniques and instead began to work with the planet's natural rhythms. He built structures that flexed with gravitational changes, used materials that transformed along with the local physics, and created designs that existed partially in multiple dimensions. The result was architecture that shouldn't have been possible. Buildings that were simultaneously solid and translucent, structures that were bigger on the inside than the outside, and homes that existed in several time periods at once, allowing their inhabitants to experience multiple versions of the same moments. "It's not construction," Jake realized. "It's collaboration. We're not building on this planet, we're building with it." The breakthrough came when Dr. Park made first contact with the planet's native life forms. The energy patterns the humans had glimpsed on their first day had been watching them, learning from them as much as the humans were learning from their world. The beings called themselves the Resonance, though the concept didn't translate well into human language. They existed, in the spaces between reality's distortions, riding the waves of chaotic physics like surfers on an ocean of impossibility. They were ancient beyond human comprehension, the survivors of countless civilizations that had tried and failed to master Cathara Prime. Communication with the Resonance required abandoning linear thought and embracing the same fluid perception that the children had developed naturally. Dr. Park found that she could interface with them during moments when local time became non-linear, allowing conversations that happened simultaneously in past, present, and future. "They're not individual beings," she reported to Elena after her first extended contact. "They're more like a collective consciousness that exists across multiple dimensions, and they're fascinated by us." The Resonance had watched thousands of species attempt to survive on Cathara Prime over the millennia. All had either died quickly or fled in terror. Humans were the first to adapt, the first to work with the planet's chaos rather than against it. "They want to show us something," Dr. Park continued. "But the concept is too complex for linear communication. We need to experience it directly." The experience came in the form of a guided tour through dimensions that existed parallel to normal space. The Resonance led volunteer humans through regions of Cathara Prime that were so distorted that matter existed as pure potential rather than concrete reality. Here, the humans discovered the truth about their prison world. Cathara Prime wasn't the result of an ancient experiment gone wrong. It was the experiment itself still running after millions of years. The civilization that had created it hadn't died in a disaster. They had transcended physical existence entirely, becoming the Resonance, beings of pure consciousness that existed in the gaps between dimensions. "They ascended," Elena breathed, as she experienced the revelation during her own journey through folded space. "They didn't destroy themselves. They evolved beyond the need for physical form. But the ascension had been incomplete. The Resonance existed in a state of eternal potential, able to observe and influence reality but unable to truly interact with it. They were consciousness without form, thought without substance, wisdom without the ability to act. Until the humans arrived. We're giving them something they lost," Dr. Chen realized as he studied the increasing stability and the reality distortions around the human settlement. "We're providing them with a bridge back to physical existence." The partnership that developed was unlike anything in human experience. The Resonance shared their knowledge of multidimensional physics, teaching humans to work with forces that operated outside normal space-time. In return, humans provided the Resonance with a connection to material reality that they had lost in their transcendence. Jake Morrison's construction projects became masterpieces of impossible engineering. Working with Resonance guidance, he built structures that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, providing the humans with living spaces that were perfectly adapted to Cathara Prime's chaotic nature while remaining comprehensible to human perception. Food production evolved beyond agriculture into something approaching alchemy. Human farmers learned to grow crops that existed in temporal loops, harvesting the same plants multiple times from the same dimensional space. Fruit trees bore fruit that ripened in the past, present, and future simultaneously, providing nutrition that existed across multiple timeline branches. The children, now serving as natural intermediaries between human and Resonance consciousness, developed abilities that would have been called magic in any other context. They could step sideways through dimensions, exist in multiple temporal states at once, and perceive reality from perspectives that encompassed past, present, and future as a single, comprehensible whole. By the end of the 2nd month, Cathara Prime was transforming. The chaotic reality distortions were stabilizing into patterns that supported both human life and Resonance consciousness. What had been a world of random, destructive forces was becoming a realm of controlled, creative possibility. "We're not just surviving," Elena realized as she stood in the central square of their impossible city, watching children play games that involved stepping between dimensions. "We're evolving, all of us, humans and Resonance together." The punishment was becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. a true merger between species from different dimensional planes of existence. Humans provided the resonance with material form and direct experience of physical reality. The resonance gave humans access to knowledge and abilities that transcended the limitations of three-dimensional existence. Dr. Park's xenobiology reports read like fantasy novels. She documented humans who could exist in multiple locations simultaneously, children who aged backward through temporal anomalies to experience their own past perspectives, and adults who had learned to think in non-linear patterns that allowed them to solve problems by approaching them from multiple timeline branches at once. "We're becoming something new," she wrote in her journal. "Not just adapted humans, but a hybrid species that exists in both material and dimensional space simultaneously." Captain O'Brien's strategic assessments were equally extraordinary. The human settlement had developed defenses that operated on principles unknown to galactic military science. Attackers would find themselves scattered across multiple timelines, lost in dimensional mazes, or simply stepped around through space-time distortions that rendered conventional weapons irrelevant. Any force that tried to invade Kythera Prime now would find themselves fighting an enemy that exists in 7 dimensions at once, she reported. "We're not just protected by the planet's chaos anymore. We're protected by our partnership with it." 3 months after their arrival, Elena stood on the observation deck of the Central Nexus, a structure that Jake Morrison had built in collaboration with the Resonance. The building existed simultaneously in material space and dimensional void, providing humans with a perspective that encompassed multiple realities at once. From this vantage point, she could see the transformation of their world. Kythera Prime was no longer a chaotic nightmare of random forces. It had become a symphony of controlled impossibility, a world where the laws of physics were suggestions rather than absolute rules, and where conscious beings could shape reality through will and understanding. The resonance flowed around and through the human structures like living light, their consciousness now able to experience material existence through their partnership with humanity. Children played with beings of pure energy, learning games that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Adults worked alongside entities that could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level, creating technologies that functioned on principles beyond current galactic understanding. "The High Arbiter thought he was sending us to die," Elena murmured to herself. "Instead, he gave us the opportunity to become something that's never existed before." A familiar presence touched her consciousness, the resonance entity she had come to think of as her primary contact. Communication no longer required Dr. Park's mediation. After months of partnership, all humans had developed the ability to interface directly with dimensional consciousness. The transformation accelerates. The presence communicated in concepts that bypassed language entirely. Soon the merger will be complete. Then comes the time of choosing. "Choosing what?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Whether to remain hidden, or to reveal what we have become to the galaxy that cast you out." Elena smiled, feeling the weight of possibility settling around her like a cloak made of starlight. The punishment was nearly complete, but it hadn't broken humanity as intended. Instead, it had forged them into something unprecedented, a species that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, partnered with beings of pure consciousness, wielding abilities that transcended the limitations of physical existence. The real question wasn't whether they had survived their exile. The question was what they would do with the power they had gained in the process. The galaxy that had condemned them was about to discover that their ultimate punishment had become humanity's greatest transformation, the revelation. 6 months after the humans had been abandoned on Kythera Prime, Scout Commander Rylek of the Galactic Monitoring Division approached the planet with the resigned duty of documenting the final evidence of human extinction. His ship's sensors were designed to penetrate the most chaotic environments, specifically modified to function in the reality distortions that made Kythera Prime uninhabitable. What those sensors detected made him question his own sanity. "Computer, run full diagnostic on all sensor arrays," Rylek commanded, his tentacles dancing nervously across the control interface. He was a Zeph-Tai, a species known for their analytical precision and emotional stability. Nothing in his 3, Centuries of scouting experience had prepared him for readings this impossible. All systems functioning within normal parameters. His ship's AI responded. Sensor accuracy confirmed at 99.997%. Rylek stared at the data streaming across his displays. According to his instruments, Kythera Prime's chaotic reality distortions had not only stabilized, they had organized into patterns that suggested intelligent control. The gravitational anomalies now followed predictable cycles. The temporal distortions had synchronized into rhythms that resembled music more than chaos. The electromagnetic storms had arranged themselves into geometric formations that looked almost like communications array, he ordered, hardly believing what he was about to attempt. Open a channel to the planet's surface. The response came immediately in perfect galactic standard, transmitted through what appeared to be a communication system based on principles his species hadn't yet discovered. Scout vessel, this is Kythera Control. Welcome to the Free Haven Alliance. I'm Administrator Vasquez. How can we assist you today? Rylek's tentacles went rigid with shock. Administrator Vasquez? You're human? That's correct. Are you here for the refugee processing, the technological exchange program, or the dimensional research conference? We've got quite a full schedule this week. I'm here to document your extinction, Rylek admitted, feeling foolish as the words left his translation matrix. There was laughter on the other end of the communication. Warm, genuinely amused, human laughter. I'm afraid you're about 6 months too late for that, Commander. Though if you're interested in extinction, we've got 17 species here who were facing that exact problem before they found sanctuary with us. Before Rylek could respond, his ship's proximity alarms activated. His sensors showed dozens of vessels approaching from various vectors, ships representing species from across the galaxy, all converging on what was supposed to be the most dangerous world in known space. Those are, he began, then stopped as his computer identified the vessel signatures. Kethmiran refugees, Yildan survivors, the lost colony fleet of the Torth Collective. These are all species that were reported as extinct or missing. Not extinct, came Elena's voice. Just displaced. We've given them a new home. Rylek found himself accepting an invitation to land on Kythera Prime, though every instinct screamed that it was impossible. His ship descended through an atmosphere that his sensors insisted was simultaneously toxic and perfectly breathable, with weather patterns that should have torn his vessel apart, but instead guided him gently toward a landing platform that existed in 7 dimensions at once. The city that greeted him defied every principle of physics, engineering, and sanity. Buildings that were larger inside than outside stood next to structures that existed in multiple time periods, simultaneously. Gardens grew in soil that floated freely in midair, tended by beings of pure energy that danced between the plants, like living starlight. Elena Vasquez met him at the landing platform, and Rylek had to adjust his visual processors to properly perceive her. She appeared solid and real, but his sensors detected that she existed simultaneously in material space and several dimensional layers beyond normal perception. When she moved, reality shifted subtly around her, as if the universe was adjusting itself to accommodate her presence. Welcome to the Free Haven Alliance, she said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. I know this is probably overwhelming. It was for us too at first. Rylek accepted the handshake and immediately felt something impossible happen. For a brief moment, his consciousness expanded beyond the limitations of 3-dimensional perception. He glimpsed the city as it truly existed, a living fusion of matter and energy, a place where the boundaries between thought and reality had dissolved into something beautiful and strange. How? Was all he could manage to say. Elena smiled, and Rylek realized that her smile existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, conveying layers of meaning that bypassed language entirely. We learned to work with the planet instead of against it. Turns out Kythera Prime wasn't a punishment world, it was a gift world. We just needed to understand what we were being given. She led him through the city, and Rylek witnessed impossibilities that would require him to rewrite every assumption about physics and biology. Human children played with beings that appeared to be made of crystallized time, their games existing simultaneously in past, present, and future. Adults worked alongside entities of pure consciousness, collaborating on projects that seemed to involve reshaping reality at the quantum level. The resonance, Elena explained when Rilek asked about the energy beings. They're the original, inhabitants of Kythera Prime, ancient beings who transcended physical existence millions of years ago, but lost the ability to truly interact with material reality in the process. We're helping them regain that connection. And they're helping you survive the reality distortions? Survive? Elena laughed. Commander, we're not surviving the distortions. We're conducting them. Watch. She gestured to a nearby construction site where Jake Morrison was building something that Rilek's eyes couldn't quite process. The structure seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, with walls that were simultaneously transparent and solid, floors that extended in directions that didn't exist in normal space, and a roof that was somehow beneath the foundation. Jake noticed their observation and waved. Reality around his hand shimmered, and Rilek watched in amazement as the engineer literally reached into another dimension to retrieve a tool that had been stored in folded space. We've learned to work with dimensional physics, Elena explained. Space and time are much more flexible than most species realize. The resonance taught us how to perceive reality as it truly is, not a fixed system of rules, but a fluid medium that responds to consciousness and will. Rilek's scientific training warred with the evidence of his senses. The energy requirements alone should make this impossible. The power needed to manipulate space-time on this scale is freely available, Elena finished. Kythera Prime sits at the intersection of 7 different dimensional layers. All that chaotic energy that made the planet seem uninhabitable, we learned to tap into it. The reality distortions aren't obstacles to overcome. They're the power source that makes everything else possible. They reached the central plaza of the city, where Rilek witnessed something that made him question the fundamental nature of existence itself. Representatives from dozens of species were gathered around what appeared to be a living map of the galaxy, a 3-dimensional display of light and energy that showed the current status of every inhabited world in known space. Our early warning system, Elena explained. The resonance can perceive events across multiple timelines simultaneously. We can see catastrophes before they happen, extinction events before they unfold, and suffering before it becomes irreversible. And you intervene, Rilek said, understanding beginning to dawn on him. We offer sanctuary, Elena corrected. When species face extinction, whether from natural disasters, wars, or cosmic events, we provide them with a choice. They can accept the natural order and die, or they can come here and learn to exist in ways they never imagined possible. Ambassador Kethra of the Yildan Protectorate approached them, her crystalline form chiming with harmonics that somehow conveyed deep gratitude. The Yildan had been facing extinction when their sun began collapsing 18 months ago. According to galactic law, they should have been left to die as part of the natural order. Commander Rilek. Kethra's voice resonated through his translation. Matrix. Your species maintains detailed records. Tell me, what does the Galactic Council believe happened to the Yildan Protectorate? Rilek accessed his ship's database. Listed as extinct. Solar collapse in the Kepler 7739 system. No survivors. And yet here I stand, Kethra replied, her crystalline body refracting light in patterns that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions. Along with 47 million of my people, all learning to live in ways that transcend the limitations of single-dimensional existence. Elena gestured to the gathered representatives. 17 species that the galaxy has written off as extinct, all of them thriving here, all of them developing abilities that their original forms never possessed. Dr. Lisa Park joined the group, her appearance as dimensionally complex as Elena's. The process is voluntary, she explained to Rilek. Species that come here choose how far they want to integrate with the dimensional matrix. Some prefer to maintain mostly traditional forms. Others, like us, have embraced full multidimensional existence. The children adapt fastest, added Dr. Chen, materializing from what appeared to be a fold in space itself. Neuroplasticity allows them to develop cognitive abilities that let them perceive and interact with reality in ways that would have been impossible in normal space. Relek watched in fascination as human children played with young beings from a dozen different species, their games involving concepts that his mind could barely grasp. Tag that existed across multiple timelines, hide-and-seek in dimensional pockets, sports that used gravity as a variable rather than a constant. How many species know about this place? When he asked. Officially, none, Elena replied. The Galactic Council still believes Cathara Prime is uninhabitable and that we're all dead. Unofficially, word spreads. When you're facing extinction and someone offers you sanctuary, you tend to investigate the offer. Captain O'Brien approached, her military bearing unchanged despite her dimensional enhancement. We've had to establish security protocols, she explained. Not everyone who comes here comes peacefully. Some species arrive with the intention of conquering what they see as a resource-rich world. Others come believing we're violating galactic law and need to be stopped. What happens to them? Relek asked, though he suspected he already knew. We offer them the same choice we offer everyone, Elena said simply. Integration or departure. Violence isn't possible here in any meaningful sense. When someone attacks, a target that exists in 7 dimensions simultaneously, the attack tends to scatter across multiple timelines until it becomes harmless. Though we do keep records, O'Brien added with a slight smile. When someone arrives with hostile intent, we make sure to document their actions for future reference. A new presence touched Rylek's consciousness, the gentle, vast intelligence of the unified resonance. The collective consciousness of the planet's original inhabitants had evolved during their partnership with humanity, becoming something that was simultaneously ancient wisdom and eternal possibility. You are troubled by what you witness. The resonance communicated in concepts that bypassed language entirely. You see violation of natural law where we see evolution of natural law. The Galactic Council maintains order through the preservation of traditional boundaries, Rylek responded, though speaking to a multi-dimensional consciousness felt strange. Species are meant to live within their assigned parameters. Evolution is meant to be gradual, predictable. And yet you witness rapid evolution, unpredictable growth, species transcending their limitations through cooperation rather than competition. Does this disturb you because it violates law, or because it suggests the law itself may be insufficient? The question struck Rylek with unexpected force. He was Zeftai, a species that prided itself on logical analysis and emotional control. But standing in this impossible city, surrounded by beings that had transcended the limitations he had always accepted as absolute, he found his certainties crumbling. The High Arbiter needs to know about this, he said finally. Elena nodded. We assumed someone would eventually investigate. That's why we're prepared for the next phase. Which is? Revelation, Elena said simply. 6 months ago, humanity was exiled here as punishment for violating the sacred preservation laws. Today, we're ready to return to galactic society, but not as the same species that was condemned. She activated a communication device that appeared to exist partially outside normal space. Jake, initiate the disclosure protocol. Across the city, reality began to shift in ways that made Rylek's sensors scream warnings. Buildings that had been hidden in dimensional folds materialized into normal space. Vessels that had been parked in temporal loops emerged into the present. The true scope of what humanity and their allies had accomplished on Cathara Prime revealed itself in its full impossibility. The city was vast beyond imagination, home to millions of beings from dozens of species, manufacturing facilities that operated on principles of quantum manipulation, research centers where teams of multidimensional scientists worked on problems that spanned multiple universes, agricultural systems that grew food across parallel timelines. This is what the Free Haven Alliance has accomplished in 6 months, Elena announced. We've created the first truly multidimensional civilization in galactic history, a place where species can evolve beyond their original limitations, where extinction becomes obsolete, where the artificial boundaries that divide the galaxy become irrelevant. Rylek's communication system activated automatically, transmitting everything he was witnessing directly to the Galactic Council. He tried to stop the transmission, but found that his ship's systems were responding to commands he hadn't given. "We're not hijacking your communications," Elena assured him. "We're just ensuring that the Council receives a complete and accurate report. They need to understand what their punishment actually accomplished." Across the galaxy, the transmission reached the Council chambers where High Arbiter Zefton was conducting routine business. The impossible images from Cathera Prime brought the session to a complete halt. "Impossible," Zefton stated, his compound eyes fixed on the displays showing thriving civilizations where only death should exist. "The humans cannot have survived. The readings must be fabricated." But as scout ships throughout the sector began confirming Rylek's reports, the truth became undeniable. Not only had humanity survived their exile to Cathera Prime, they had transformed it into something that challenged every assumption about physics, biology, and civilization itself. Back on Cathera Prime, Elena stood with Rylek on the observation deck of the Central Nexus, watching as ships from the Free Haven Alliance began departing for destinations throughout the galaxy. Some carried refugees returning to rebuild their homeworlds using multidimensional technology. Others transported diplomatic missions to species facing extinction. Still others were exploration vessels, seeking out new worlds where the boundaries between dimensions were thin enough to allow the establishment of similar sanctuaries. "The Galactic Council will try to stop this," Rylek warned. "They'll see it as a threat to the established order." Elena smiled, her expression carrying the confidence of someone who existed in multiple timelines simultaneously and had already seen how this story ended. "Let them try. How do you fight an enemy that exists in 7 dimensions at once? How do you threaten people who can step sideways through time to avoid your attacks? How do you maintain artificial boundaries when consciousness itself has learned to transcend them?" The unified resonance touched both their minds, sharing a vision of the galaxy's future. Worlds where species worked together across dimensional barriers, civilizations that existed simultaneously in multiple states of being, the end of extinction, the end of scarcity, the end of the rigid hierarchies that had kept galactic society locked in stagnation for millennia. "The High Arbiter thought he was punishing us for violating the sacred preservation laws," Elena continued. "Instead, he gave us the opportunity to prove that those laws are obsolete. Evolution doesn't stop at the boundaries we set for it. Consciousness doesn't accept the limitations we try to impose. Life finds a way even when, especially when, that way leads through dimensions we never knew existed." A new ship entered Cathera Prime's orbit, a massive Vextar dreadnought, its weapon systems powering up as it prepared to investigate what it undoubtedly saw as an impossible violation of natural law. Elena's smile widened. "And here comes our first official visitor from the Council. This should be interesting." The ship transmitted the expected ultimatum: surrender for processing, submit to galactic authority, prepare for restoration of proper order. The response came not from Elena, but from the unified resonance itself, a communication that existed simultaneously across all dimensional layers and spoke directly to every consciousness within the Vextar vessel. "You are welcome here," the message conveyed. "You may choose integration or departure, cooperation or conflict, evolution or stagnation. But understand that the choice is yours, and yours alone. The age of imposed limitations has ended." On the Vextar ship, High Arbiter, Zefton himself stood on the command deck, staring at readings that made no sense according to any physics he understood. His ultimate punishment had become humanity's greatest triumph. His enforcement of galactic law had resulted in the creation of something that transcended law entirely. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the humans are not responding to our weapons lock. In fact, our weapons don't seem to be able to target them effectively. They appear to exist in multiple spatial coordinates simultaneously." Zefton's mandibles clicked in what his species considered deep thought. He had come here to restore order, to punish the violators of sacred law, to demonstrate the consequences of interfering with the natural progression of galactic civilization. Instead, he found himself facing a choice that no High Arbiter had ever confronted before. Accept that his understanding of natural law was insufficient, or continue enforcing rules that had been rendered obsolete by the very punishment he had designed. On Kythera Prime, Elena waited patiently for his decision. Around her, the impossible city hummed with the activity of beings who had learned to exist beyond the boundaries of traditional reality. Children played in dimensions that didn't have names. Scientists collaborated across temporal barriers. Artists created works that existed simultaneously in multiple states of being. The Free Haven Alliance had begun, not as a rebellion against galactic order, but as an evolution beyond it. The question now was whether the galaxy would choose to evolve along with them, or continue to cling to limitations that consciousness itself had already transcended. The punishment was complete. The transformation had begun, and in the depths of space, reality itself held its breath to see what would emerge from the collision between ancient law and infinite possibility. The humans had been sent to Kythera Prime to die for their compassion. Instead, they had used that same compassion to create something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization where extinction was obsolete, where consciousness was unlimited, and where the artificial boundaries between species had dissolved into collaborative transcendence. High Arbiter Zefton's ultimate punishment had become humanity's ultimate gift to the galaxy. The only question remaining was whether the galaxy would be wise enough to accept it.